Hello, everybody. My name is Justin Barton. For my midterm, I chose to cover a company called Icon. The past few years, they've been focusing all of their research and efforts into creating large-scale 3D printers that are capable of printing houses for people so that they can get them at a cheaper price than the current market. So, first chapter is an overview of marketing. And I got a nice picture in the background for the different steps of marketing. So for the first concept, marketing, I found a part in the podcast where the host talks about how cities in the world have housing shortages, which helped Jason, the person that is the founder of Icon, look more into easier and more affordable ways to make housing for people. With market-oriented, Jason seeing that there was a large amount of people that couldn't afford their houses due to the inflation. So this was his way of finding a more affordable option for people to still be able to live in houses. And societal marketing orientation, he tried his best to cut his costs as much as he could so that he can make his houses more affordable, and he tried his best to find eco-friendly materials that allowed him to produce less emissions and keep things safer for the environment, and to hopefully build houses faster than the conventional ways. So the next chapter is strategic planning for a competitive advantage. I got a nice competitive advantage sign in the back. So Jason's mission statement, which he spoke of the entire time through the whole podcast, was that he wanted to stay as eco-friendly as possible while keeping affordable housing. And at one point, he actually talked with his board of directors that he was so passionate that he wanted to work on this on his off days just so that he would be able to work on it. And with strategic planning, I feel like that also plays into it because that was at the front of his mind because he wanted to keep all of his resources as sustainable as possible. So he wanted things to basically run themselves and stay clean in the process. With competitive advantage, I feel like with him using his 3D printers, it gave him a one-up on people that were currently in the market creating these houses. And especially with the rising costs, the 3D printer used less, you could say, labor costs, and it allowed him to save more money altogether. And so the next one is the marketing environment. I had a nice little infographic on the value of the dollar from 1913 until now. And so, with the first one, applied research, Jason talked about this with his how so many people had access to 3D printers, but they were just using them for cheap stuff. It was nothing large scale, everything that you could readily buy in a store. So whenever he tried to print things on a bigger scale like a house, he not only was improving the market, but a lot of people didn't believe that he could do it because it hadn't been done before. Now with purchasing power, Jason strived to keep things cheaper which ultimately would allow for somebody to have a higher purchasing power because they would be able to spend more money in other places and less on their housing. And that directly correlates with the inflation part of this, is that he was trying his best to keep things as cheap as possible because of the rising rates of inflation for housing, which almost directly correlated to people not being able to afford their current housing standards, pretty much. So developing a global vision, a nice picture of a 3D printer there. So with global marketing, when Jason won the competition that he entered his 3D printed house in, it expanded his reach out into Mexico with houses that needed more affordable options, especially with the villages of people that didn't really make enough money to buy a house for themselves. And this directly leads into also the global vision, because it talks about the opportunities in Mexico. And so since he was able to make his changes to his design, it opened up a new market that he did not know was previously available, because people firsthand seen the impact that he was able to have with his housing, and they wanted to be a part of it. And the same thing with capital intensive. Jason directly has his 3D printers at the center of everything. So that helps him to keep everything capital intensive, because without the 3D printers, he would essentially not have a business. So with consumer decision making, I got a nice little picture down here where you have a stimulus, an interpretation of that stimulus, and then the response to the stimulus. So with the stimulus, he tried his best to innovate around the idea of using concrete, because everybody's so used to seeing concrete. It is more of a visual thing that if you would see something else, you would be more reluctant to trust that it was a good product, even though it could be. You're still so used to seeing that concrete that everything else is made out of. And this could also kind of play into the nudge factor, because he tries to get the audience to attempt coming up with a building material that can pass inspections and is cheaper than drywall, so that people can really put into perspective what he's doing and how he's able to effectively make these houses for people. With the personality, Jason felt the need to find a better solution for the buildings, so that firsthand demonstrated his dedication to making a change in the world. He seen a problem, and he would not stop until he was able to find the solution for it. So the total market is really just the overall picture of the entirety of the market. And once you segment it up, you can get all the way down to the target market. So with this, there are variables. And with that, Jason talks about the eco-friendly aspect of the organization. And that allowed him to collaborate with already structured companies that were working with 3D printing as well, so that he was able to find people that already had the information that he was lacking, so that he could learn as much as possible, as quick as possible. And this also helped him to boost his business a little bit higher, than it already currently was. Now, with the benefits segmentation, Jason talked about how people were able to get a better structured house that's better insulated, mold resistant, more resilient, energy efficient, fireproof, and water resistant. So these people were getting all these benefits with a cheaper home because of the way that Jason was able to design the homes that were being produced with his 3D printer. With the usage rate segmentation, there's a introduction of 3D printed houses that were using a more eco-friendly cement, which allowed for less of a need of the traditional Portland cement. And with the new cement that Jason created, it also allowed for less of a carbon footprint. And it also helped to speed up the production because it did not take as much time for the cement to set like normal cement usually would. So product concepts. With a product, Jason talked about how when he was meeting his first customer, by being able to demonstrate that his product worked and it could help people, it helped him get his first contract with the group in Mexico for building the homes in the villages. Now, with the product item, Jason talked about this when he discussed that he had to create basically a brand new concrete and find a way to make it perform the exact way that he wanted. It had to perfectly cohere to the vision that he had in his mind. And this directly correlates to the product modification. He basically had to create a non-Newtonian fluid into a concrete that had the ability to change based on the conditions it was met with. And it had to be able to harden, had to be able to come out smooth in the dimensions that they needed and at the quantities that they needed as well. And before this, concrete really was just made one way. And as soon as it hardened, and there was no way in changing it. And here I have a nice little photo of basically product modification where it's the same concept but 5 different versions of it. So developing and managing products. This, as talked about on the previous slide with a new product, with him creating his new concrete, he had to create it with such precision so that it would not harden too fast or too slow, come out at the right speeds, could be molded, and find the perfect level of hardness so that after everything was set, he could still go back and install the windows, the electrical, the doors, and every other aspect that really turned it into a home. So with this strategy, there's the new product strategy. So he had to find ways to bring the vision that was in his head into a reality. So with this, he had to make a tough decision on if he pursued his new company that he was founding or stick with his old company that created eco-friendly tree houses and tried to balance his time in between the two. But he ultimately decided that would be in his best interest to pursue Icon and resign from his role in his previous company so that he could focus more of his time on Icon in developing the vision that he was working towards. With his concept test, he took his building, basically already had a prototype because he was entering into a competition, but he was also given his first potential customer once they were able to really see that, this guy knows what he was talking about, and he wasn't just pulling our leg about 3D printing a house. So once he actually produced a working model, he was then able to prove his competence, more or less, and secure new clientele for his 3D printed houses. So with the supply chain management and marketing channels, the sustainable supply chain management, Jason talked about sustainable materials from the start of the podcast until the end of the podcast. And everything was finding a way to make it not only affordable, but make it be able to use less materials than it previously did, whether that be the labor of the employees, the physical raw materials, or just the time, the time aspect of it as well. Everything he wanted to keep as low as possible. So with the three-dimensional printing, that directly plays into it because Jason has a 3D printing device, really, that uses cement to create the affordable homes for the people. So that plays a major role in everything that he does in his day-to-day life. The form utility, Jason talks about how the people were wanting to look for houses that they were seeing and asking to have them print that house instead of thinking about things that haven't been built yet and could be built with this technology. So they were just looking at things that have already been made and limiting their own creativity because they were used to just seeing the same thing. So with retailing, with backstock, Jason used this because he builds the houses to order. He doesn't have any of the houses pre-built or any of the materials pre-made. Everything is basically brought out to the site and built on site. With brand cannibalization, I don't believe there are very many other, if any, other companies that use 3D printing to make houses, but it's cannibalizing the current housing market because not only is it finding a way to make it cheaper, it's finding a way to make the process faster. So not only is it making things more affordable, but it's also requiring less labor because it can be done in a more timely manner. And with direct retailing, this played a crucial role in Jason's business because he had the other companies coming to him so that they could get a contract, I would say, to have houses built. He wasn't really doing much actual door-to-door sales. It was more of the people coming to him because they had heard about what he had done before. So with the pricing concepts, chose profit because he was talking about how he wasn't able to make things as affordable or make near as much money because there were working hours for construction in the places that he was building homes. So he had to limit the amount of hours that he could do it every day. In the podcast, he talked about how he could have a house printed in 1 week flat, but due to the labor restrictions the construction restrictions during the day, he unfortunately had to take 2 weeks. So that was another week of labor that they had to pay for. So they weren't able to make it nearly as affordable. Now with supply, he uses supply to help his business when he is trying to find out how many houses are needing to be supplied and how many he should really be, I guess, producing, you could say. With elastic demand, he almost directly talks about this whenever he brings up how he won the competition. People were, he told people that he was building the houses cheaply, and suddenly everybody wanted that house because they just heard how cheap it could be, and they wanted one for themselves. I have 2 slides here for my key terms. So my takeaways, my left side is individual takeaways that I found interesting through the entire podcast, and the right side is my takeaway from the entirety of the podcast. So my takeaway, one of them was only 3D printers can check all the boxes whenever it comes to eco-friendly materials, speed, and cost efficiency. I feel like this talks about the fact that only 3D printers are able to be as fast as they are. It would require several workers working countless hours to be able to produce things nearly as fast as a 3D printer could. For my second takeaway, I heard that Portland cement accounts for 5 to 8% of the world's carbon emissions. So whenever they mix Portland cement, the chemical reaction puts about 5 to 8% of the world's carbon emissions into the air. Now, this next one I found the most interesting out of all of them. It was whenever Jason was talking about why we still use drywall. It's why are we still using the same materials that we watch fail us? So why would we keep using an inferior material that's so cheaply made that you constantly just have to keep on replacing it? In the video, he used the example that his family home was hit by a hurricane, and everybody in the town had to go through and replace several feet of drywall in their entire house because it had failed the structural integrity of the house. Another thing is his concrete is more resilient to earthquakes. It was hit by a 9.2 magnitude earthquake, which a normal house, it would have just crumbled, would have destroyed it. But his house was able to withstand it. The next one is some things look expensive, but are the same price to print as a straight line. So I feel like this one is saying even though things look nice, they don't always have to be expensive. They can be cheap and still look nice. Now this last one actually kind of shocked me, that there is 1 billion unsheltered people worldwide. That means that 1 billion people either can't afford or don't have a house and are living out on the streets at all times, which I think is just an astronomically high number. So my overall takeaway from the podcast is that I admire the dedication of Jason, and I like the direction that he is taking, trying to take his life in. I admire that he's working on his off days to be able to achieve his goals and make his dreams of 3D printing houses for a cheaper cost come true. my last slide is just my branded slide deck where I tried to keep things as green as possible because Jason wanted to keep things as eco-friendly as possible, so I tried to keep everything as green as possible, and I tried to add in pictures to liven up everything. I believe that is all I have. Thank you.